The scorching sun burned over the Arizona desert as dust rose with every hoofbeat. Naya, a young Apache warrior, had been hunted by bounty riders since dawn. Her arrows were spent, her horse wounded. She fought with every ounce of courage, but the bullets whistling past finally struck her side. Bleeding and exhausted, she stumbled across the barren land. Her vision blurred. Was this how her journey ended? She collapsed under the shadow of a lonely oak, whispering a prayer to the Great Spirit. Darkness consumed her, and she closed her eyes, certain that death had claimed her. The silence that followed felt endless, as if the desert itself had swallowed her spirit. Her mind drifted between shadow and memory, hearing echoes of her father's voice teaching her how to track, how to fight, how to never bow to fear. She remembered her mother's songs at night, sung softly by the fire, promising that the stars would always watch over their people. Those memories clung to her as her breath slowed, carrying her deeper into what she thought was the last journey. The wind hummed low, and her hand fell limp across the dust, but death did not come. Instead, there was the faint creak of leather, a man's cautious footsteps, and the sound of water being poured into a tin. Naya's eyes fluttered open just enough to see a shape against the fading light. A man in a wide-brimmed hat kneeling beside her. His face was rough, lined from years of sun and hardship, but his eyes were steady. She tried to lift her hand to defend herself, but her strength betrayed her. Darkness claimed her again, though this time, the last thing she felt was strong arms lifting her from the ground. When she woke again, the desert was gone. The cool scent of wood smoke filled her lungs, and she lay on a bed softer than she had ever known. Rough wooden beams crossed the ceiling, and a small lantern flickered against the wall. Her shoulder was tightly wrapped, and her side no longer bled. For a moment she thought she was dreaming, that perhaps she had passed into another world, but then the scrape of a chair startled her. The man from the desert sat near the window, his rifle resting against the wall. He turned at the sound of her movement. "You're awake," he said in a voice that carried the weight of both caution and relief. His words were English, not her tongue, but she understood enough. Naya pushed herself up with difficulty, her pride bristling. "Why did you bring me here?" she demanded, though her voice was hoarse. The man stood slowly, as though not to startle her. "Because you were dying," he answered simply. "And I couldn't leave you there. My name's Thomas." His plain honesty unsettled her more than lies would have. She turned her face away, unwilling to show the fear and confusion swirling inside. Days passed in uneasy silence. Thomas tended to his land at dawn, moving with the rhythm of a man who had worked the soil his whole life. He mended fences, checked the livestock, carried water, and always returned to the cabin with food: a bread, beans, or broth, which he set near her without ceremony. Naya ate with suspicion at first, her hand never far from the knife he had left within reach. Her people had been taught never to trust settlers, for trust too often ended in betrayal. And yet, every day she watched, and every day she found no malice in his manner. Still, her heart wrestled with questions. Why would a farmer risk himself for her, when bounty hunters scoured the desert for Apache scalps? Why not turn her over and collect the reward? She studied him as he worked, noting the scars on his hands, the heaviness in his walk, the way he sometimes paused to stare out at the empty horizon as if searching for something he had lost. She wondered if he too carried wounds, not of the body but of the spirit. That thought unsettled her, for it was easier to hate a man than to pity him. On the fourth night, when the moon spilled silver across the plains, Naya rose from the bed despite the pain. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself to the table where her knife gleamed faintly. She gripped it, testing the weight, reminding herself she was still a warrior. Thomas appeared in the doorway, a bucket in his hand, and stopped at the sight. His eyes met hers without fear. "If you mean to kill me," he said quietly, "do it clean." "But no, Thesa, your wound won't heal without care." For a long moment she held the blade steady, but her arm lowered at last. That night she could not sleep. She lay awake, listening to the coyotes howl in the distance, the creak of the cabin settling, and the slow, steady breathing of the man who had spared her life. Confusion knotted her thoughts. She owed him nothing, and yet without him, she would already be with her ancestors. Gratitude felt like a trap, a chain pulling her toward something she did not want to understand. Her people had taught her to be strong, to never let the enemy see weakness. But as she stared at the shadows on the wall, weakness and strength blurred together. The following morning, Thomas found her standing outside, leaning heavily on the door frame. The air was cool, the prairie stretching wide and golden under the rising sun. She breathed deeply, savoring the scent of earth and freedom. "You shouldn't be up," he said, moving toward her, but she lifted a hand to stop him. "I will not trot in a bed like a dying animal," she replied firmly. Something flickered across his face. Respect, perhaps. He only nodded, then offered her a cup of water. She accepted it with narrowed eyes, but for the first time, her hand did not tremble with distrust. As days turned into weeks, her body grew stronger. She learned to walk the field beside him, though each step sent fire through her side. She helped gather wood, her pride refusing to sit idle while he labored. They spoke little, their words clumsy across language and culture, yet silence carried its own understanding. Sometimes she caught him watching her when he thought she would not notice. Other times, she found herself listening for his footsteps, reassured by his presence. Neither admitted it aloud, but the cabin no longer felt divided by suspicion. It was becoming a place of uneasy peace. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the sound of distant riders broke that peace. Naya froze, her instincts sharpening. Thomas stepped to the window, his expression darkening. "Bounty men," he muttered. "I saw their kind before." Her heart pounded. If they discovered her, his land would burn with her. "Give me my bow," she demanded, though her wound still ached. He turned to her, jaw set. "You can barely draw it. If we fight together." His words struck her deeper than she expected. No settler had ever spoken of fighting beside her, only against her. The storm was coming. The riders drew closer, dust rising behind them, and Naya gripped her knife with renewed strength. Thomas loaded his rifle, his hand steadied despite the danger. The cabin felt smaller, tighter, filled with the weight of what might come. Naya's pulse hammered in her ears, but alongside the fear burned something sharper: defiance. She had closed her eyes to die beneath the desert sun, but now she stood alive, armed, and unbroken. Whatever fate awaited, she would not face it alone. And as the hoofbeats thundered nearer, she realized that survival was no longer just for herself, it was for both of them. But instead of the afterlife, Naya woke to the smell of wood smoke and bread. She blinked and found herself in a small wooden cabin, lying on a rough-hewn bed. A farmer, broad-shouldered, kind-eyed, was tending her wound with surprising care. "You're safe here," he said softly. "Name's Thomas. Found you near the creek." Confused, Naya tried to rise, but pain kept her down. Why would a settler help an Apache warrior, when so many others hunted her people? Suspicion mixed with gratitude in her heart. Outside, the prairie wind whispered of new danger and perhaps a bond that could change both their fates. Her eyes tracked the man carefully as he tightened the bandage on her shoulder. Every movement of his hands was practiced, patient, nothing like the harsh touch of soldiers who would have let her bleed. Still, her instincts screamed to push him away. "Why save me?" she asked in a low voice. His eyes flicked up, steady and unafraid. "Because I couldn't leave you to die," he answered. Simple words, yet they held weight. She did not know if he was foolish or honorable. Among her people, kindness from strangers often hid sharp knives. Her grip tightened on the quilt as doubt gnawed at her. Thomas rose from the bedside and moved toward the small hearth, stirring the pot that simmered slowly. "Eat when you can," he said, setting a bowl of broth on the table. His tone was gentle, but firm, as if he were speaking not to a guest, but to someone who needed reminding they were alive. Naya studied him with narrowed eyes, watching every step, every gesture. He was no soldier, that much was clear. His shoulders carried the labor of land, not war. Yet she did not relax. In her world, even farmers could betray. Still, the smell of broth tugged at her hunger. That night, the cabin creaked in the wind, and Naya lay awake staring at the low ceiling. Each breath hurt, but her mind burned more than her wounds. She thought of her people, scattered, fleeing deeper into the mountains. Were they alive? Did they believe she had fallen? A sharp ache pierced her chest at the thought of never seeing them again. Yet here she was, in a stranger's bed, shielded from the cold. Her hand drifted to the knife Thomas had left within reach. Trust was not given lightly, But she wondered why had he not disarmed her? That question troubled her most. The days that followed settled into rhythm. At dawn, Thomas left to tend the land, feeding the horse, splitting wood, checking his corn rows. Naya watched him from the doorway when she could rise, noting the steady patience of his work. He returned midday with food, offering it without comment. At first, she refused, pride stiffening her spine. But hunger broke her resolve, and she ate, though her eyes never left his. Thomas said little, yet silence between them carried no malice. It was as though he understood she was measuring him, testing whether his hands bore chains or open palms. On the fifth day, Naya stepped outside, leaning against the wall for support. The prairie spread endless, golden under the sun, stretching farther than her eyes could follow. The air smelled of earth and freedom, so different from the smoke and dust of battle. Thomas approached quietly, carrying a bucket of water. "You shouldn't be out yet," he said. She straightened, refusing to show weakness. "I am no prisoner," she answered firmly. He gave a faint smile, not mocking, simply acknowledging her spirit. "Then walk as far as you can," he replied. The challenge lingered between them, sparking something unspoken. Her strength returned slowly, but her suspicion did not fade. At night, she often dreamed of betrayal soldiers storming the cabin, flames swallowing the wooden walls. She woke with her knife clutched in her hand, sweat damp on her brow. Thomas never questioned her, though he surely noticed. Instead, he gave her space, his presence calm, as though he knew that forcing trust was impossible. This patience unnerved her. Men she had known always sought to control, to dominate. But Thomas carried himself differently, with quiet grief in his eyes, as if his battles had been fought long ago and left scars invisible. One evening, when the sky bled orange over the plains, Naya found him sharpening his tools by the porch. She hesitated, then asked the question that had burned in her since the first day. "What do you want from me?" Her tone was sharp, accusing. He paused, blade glinting in the fading light. "Nothing," he said. "You needed help. I gave it." She frowned, not believing. No one helps without reason. His gaze met hers, steady but shadowed. "My wife and son are buried on this land. I couldn't save them. Saving you, maybe it means something." The rawness of his words silenced her. That night, sleep evaded her once more. She lay listening to the wind, the rustle of the fields, and the faint creak of Thomas's chair near the window where he often kept watch. She thought of his words, of loss carved into his life. Pain was something she understood deeply. For the first time, she felt a strange pull, not of duty or survival, but of kinship. The thought unsettled her. He was still an outsider, a settler, and she was still Apache. The world beyond those cabin walls would never allow such a bond. Yet within them, for a fragile moment, it existed. As her body grew stronger, she insisted on helping with the work. Thomas protested at first, but Naya's pride demanded she not sit idle. She gathered wood, her movements steady despite lingering pain. She tended the fire, cooked simple meals, even mended tools with resourcefulness born of her people. Thomas watched her quietly, sometimes surprised at her skill, sometimes amused at her stubbornness. Neither spoke of gratitude, but their actions became their language. In the rhythm of shared labor, something fragile began to grow, a trust not spoken, but lived. Still, Naya reminded herself daily, trust was a knife with two edges. Danger returned sooner than she expected. One afternoon, as Thomas repaired a fence, dust rose on the horizon. Naya's heart clenched at the sight of riders, three of them, moving with the ease of men who hunted more than cattle. She grabbed her knife instinctively, her wounds forgotten. Thomas narrowed his eyes. "Bounty men," he muttered. Her blood chilled. They would be searching, and if they found her here, Thomas's kindness would cost him his life. "I will go," she said quickly, though her voice trembled. "Better they find me than burn your land." But Thomas shook his head. "Not while I draw a breath." The riders drew closer, their laughter carrying on the wind. Naya felt the pulse of battle stir in her chest. She was not ready, her body still healing, yet the warrior within refused to cower. She gripped her knife, steadying her breath. Thomas loaded his rifle with slow, deliberate motions, his face grim but fearless. The air between them tightened, heavy with unspoken resolve. For the first time, Naya realized she was not standing alone. A farmer who owed her nothing had chosen to fight beside her. The thought filled her with fierce determination. If death came, it would not find her surrendering. When the knock came at the door, Thomas's rifle was already raised. The riders shouted for water, claiming their horses needed rest. But Naya knew their kind eyes that searched too long, hands that reached too quick for steel. Thomas answered firmly through the door, refusing them entry. Silence followed, then laughter, sharp and mocking. "You hiding something, farmer?" one sneered. Naya's muscles coiled. The moment cracked like a whip, and steel flashed as the riders pushed in. Thomas fired, the cabin exploding with sound. Naya lunged from the shadows, her knife slicing through the chaos. In the storm of violence, warrior and farmer fought as one. When it ended, the cabin stank of gunpowder and blood. 2 riders lay dead, the third fleeing into the dusk. Thomas leaned against the wall, breathing hard, while Naya stood trembling, her blade dripping. The wound in her side burned, but her spirit burned brighter. She looked at him, their eyes locking in the flicker of the lantern. No words were spoken, but something undeniable had passed between them. Outside, the prairie winds carried the echoes of danger still to come. Inside, the cabin stood scarred but unbroken, sheltering 2 souls whose fates were now bound tighter than either had imagined.